All right, here we are in Photoshop. This is the latest version of Photoshop at the time of this recording, and I am using Adobe Photoshop CC, which stands for Creative Cloud. I am subscribed to a Creative Cloud membership for 20 bucks a month, which gets me Photoshop, which is really the only application I need when I'm web designing. I don't really use any of the other Adobe applications and software. I'm sure I could probably find use for some of the other ones, but just to save some money, I don't really need to have all of them. Photoshop does everything that I need. So here we are in just the basic bare bones Photoshop view. We need to have a file in here so that we can actually play around with this part of our lecture. So let's go ahead and do that. So you can go ahead and go File, Open, or you could just straight up go to your desktop and drag an image, for example, in. So I'm just going to grab this photograph here of me and my brother. You can just drag it right on top of the application in the dock. So there we go. There is a JPEG photograph of myself and my brother Steven. And you can also just go here, File, Open, and I could go to Desktop, and I have a PSD here that I can open. PSD stands for Photoshop Document. And there we go. This is another photograph / Photoshop document, because it's not just a photograph. We have layers in the photo here, but we'll get to that later. In this lecture, we're going to focus on the toolbar, which has a lot of tools, which lets you do almost anything when manipulating photographs, graphics, creating graphics, and websites, so on and so forth. As I've already mentioned, I like to exercise the 80-20 rule when it comes to Photoshop and a lot of other things like programming languages and languages as well, human languages, meaning 20% of the application can yield 80% of the results. So you don't need to have knowledge, a thorough knowledge of everything that the software lets you do in order to get professional results. You really only need to know about 20%. And that it could be 10%, it could be 30%, but really you don't need to know everything. And I really don't know everything about Photoshop. There's some wizards out there with Photoshop who will blow me out of the water when it comes to using Photoshop. But I have been able to sustain a healthy and successful career from home using the 20% Photoshop knowledge that I know. So I'm confident that you don't need to know everything. So I'm going to go through the toolbar here to show you the most common tools that you can use when using Photoshop, and I'll also touch on what you don't really need to know. But you're welcome to learn about that tool because there are some really cool uses for them. So let's start at the top here. We have what's called the Move tool. Now, as I go through these, I'm going to also tell you the keyboard shortcut because those are vital in saving time. Instead of just clicking on the tools here, you can use the shortcut. So to access the Move tool, you can also press V on the keyboard, which will get you the Move tool. The Move tool really just lets you move almost anything in your Photoshop document. So here I'm going to move, I have the text layer selected. I'm going to move that with the Move tool. You can move that anywhere, which you can immediately see some use for that. Or if I wanted to move the photo, I can go ahead and do that. So that's the Move tool, and you'll be using that a lot. So that's really it for the Move tool. Let's move on to the next one. This is called the Rectangular Marquee tool, and you'll see in the bottom right corner there's an arrow. That means there are more options in this button. So if I click and hold that, you can see the other options available. So there are other marquee tools: rectangular, elliptical, single row, and single column. The Rectangular Marquee tool just lets you make a selection. So here I am, I'm going to make a selection, and you can drag that selection around, or you can draw a new selection anywhere you want. You can make multiple selections by making one and then holding Shift on your keyboard. That'll give you the plus sign, as you can see there on the cursor, and you can make another selection and another selection and another selection. This is just very basic elementary examples. And when would you use this selection? It's basically if you were selecting a part of a photo or a graphic and you wanted to move it or delete it or add a color and so on and so forth. And we'll get into that. Then there's the Elliptical Marquee tool. Basically, they make circles or ellipticals or ellipses. And basically, if you wanted to create a perfect circle, you hold Shift and click and drag, and that will be a perfect circle. You can move that selection around like so. And if you wanted to add another circle, you hold Shift as well. And there is the other circle. That is the elliptical marquee, single row and single column. I never use these, but if you want to just create a pixel wide row or column, you just select it, click, and then now you have a full width 1 pixel row or column. If you wanted to create a line or something like that. Now I'll show you a practical example of that. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new layer. This might be totally new to you. You don't need to know how to do this yet, but I'm just going to show you a good example. So I just created a new layer, and I'm going to make a rectangular selection. I'm just going to draw it right here. And I want to fill that with the color black. Basically, all I would do is I would just select the paint bucket tool. Again, we'll get to that. And I can fill that with a color like black. So that's just a very basic example. And now if I wanted to use the move tool, I'll select the move tool and I can move that around if I wanted it in different spots. All right, moving on down. We have what is called the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. This lets you make selections that are kind of more freeform rather than a square or a circle. So if I wanted to just say, select something like so, like the coffee cup, if I wanted to have a little bit more of a freeform selection like that. Now I have a selection, and you can see it maintains the shape if I drag it around, and so on and so forth. If I wanted to use a polygonal lasso tool, basically that means I can create a selection that has straight lines. And every time you click, it releases or adds a new anchor point. So if I wanted to click here, I can now go this way, click here, so on and so forth. Now I'll have a polygonal sort of selection. And then there is the magnetic lasso tool. And I'm going to make sure to select the photo here to show you. Basically, it will try and act like a magnet around the object you're trying to select so you can get a really fine selection. So I'm just going to start the selection. I'm going to click here. And I'm just going to start dragging. And you could see that it's automatically connecting to the coffee cup. And you have to be really careful with this because if I go off here, it will connect to something else and screw up your selection. So you have to be very careful with this. You can also manually make anchor points by clicking if you wanted to do that, just to secure your selection. And there we go, wrap it around, and then I'm going to click on the first anchor. There it is. And now I have my selection. Now I'm going to do something here. I'm going to add more of a selection in here. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to select in here and I'm going to fix this. And how would I do that? I'll use the magnetic lasso tool again. So I'm going to click here, make sure I have this selected. Now, if I just leave it as is, it's basically just going to drag the selection around. It's not what I want. I want to add or remove something from the selection because this entire thing is the selection, but I want to remove this section. So what I do is I hold the Alt or Option key, which will give me the magnetic lasso tool, and a minus sign, which means now when I make a selection, whatever I select is actually going to remove the selection, this part of the selection in my current selected area. There we go. And now let's fix this. I'll do the same. I'll hold the Option or Alt key. There we go. I'm just going to go out here, manually make some anchors, and there we go. Let's maybe fix this too. Now, instead of removing selection, I'm going to add a selection, which is the Shift key. Click and hold. And finish up the selection. And that's decent. Pretty good. Now, what would you do with a selection in this case? Well, I could do a number of things. I could just hit delete, and I'll delete that part right there. And there goes the coffee cup. I've deleted it. I'm going to undo that by going Command Z. I can also, if I go to the Move tool, now I should be able to move this selection. And you can see here the Move tool now has a little scissors on the bottom right of the cursor, which means it's going to cut out this selection. And now I can move the coffee cup. So pretty cool. I'm going to Command Z, and then I'm going to go Command D for done. Or I can go Select, Deselect to deselect what I just did. Moving on. Down here we have the Quick Selection tool and the Magic Wand tool. This you will find immediately useful because what you can do is quickly select an object and it will automatically figure it out for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and just start clicking and holding and dragging around in here. And Photoshop automatically figures out what I'm trying to select. So there we go. It's pretty much perfectly selected the coffee cup, better than what I did with the magnetic selection tool. Now I still want to deselect here. I'll just click and hold Option or Alt while I'm selecting. And there it is. I'm going to select here just a little bit. Perfect. And there is my selection for the coffee cup using the auto. There we go. The Quick Selection tool. And now the Magic Wand tool is even cooler. So I'm going to deselect, Command D. And I'm going to use the Magic Wand tool, which basically lets you just click. And it tries its best to select. Now you can see it's pretty messy here because what it does is it selects based on the color of the pixels that you select. So if I select here, I'm going to start getting all this white up here and I'm going to get darker. Basically the whole photograph is a similar tone, so it's going to really kind of wonk around here. I find in many cases the Magic Wand tool is not very useful unless you're using straight colors. Like if I had a black box, it would easily select that black box. Okay, and moving down here, this is called the crop tool. And then there are other tools under here. I never use these: perspective crop, slice, and slice select. You don't need to use these if you're a web designer. I'm sure you can, but I don't, and it's never held me back. So I'm just going to show you the crop tool here, which basically just lets you crop what you want. You know, you can change the crop, the size, if you wanted to crop just the coffee cup. If you wanted to do a ratio up here, you could choose different ratios. And then you just go ahead and hit the check mark, and that will crop the photograph. Perfect. That's all. Down here we have the eyedropper tool, and then all of these other ones I don't use. So 3D material, I'm not really sure what that's about. Color sampler, you could sample a color, but it's basically what the eyedropper tool does, and I'll show you that in a sec. Ruler tool helps you straighten out a photograph. Notes, if you want to leave notes on your Photoshop document, which I never do. And the count tool, if you want to count objects. Again, I'm not really sure the use. Eyedropper tool. I do use this. So if I want to add a color to my swatches down here, you can see I have black and white are the default. If I wanted to select, we'll just say here, just to get this color. Now this, in my color picker, is the color, and I can get the actual color code down here in RGB and all of the other hexadecimal codes and everything, so I can use for HTML and CSS. I can select other parts of the photo and it will tell me the color. And that's very useful if I want to sample a color and incorporate it into a design. And it will change down here and it will give me the code. And I go ahead and hit OK. Okay, moving on. Right here we have the patch tool. This is kind of a cool, this is more for photo manipulation. So I'm just going to switch over to this photograph here of my brother and I. And I'll show you the use for the spot healing brush, patch, content aware, and red eye. So initially it should be on the spot healing. Basically spot healing lets you remove blemishes and certain things like that. So let's say this little mole up here on my brother's forehead. I'm going to use the spot healing brush and I could just click on it and it should automatically remove it. As you can see, it just did. And you could do that. I'm just going to try here. These wrinkles across my forehead, you can click and drag and it will do its best to fix that. Sometimes it's a little funky and it kind of incorporates certain parts of the photograph in that section, and so it kind of looks a little wonky, but for the most part it does good. If it doesn't work out, you can always edit undo and it will go back and you can fix that. So there we go. You basically just removed all the wrinkles on my forehead. Now I look just a little bit younger. Same with my brother. Let's go ahead and try that out. Thinking, there you go. Pretty pretty much did a good job. You can see here it kind of left a little funny spot here, so you can always try and fix that. Sometimes it does a bad job, and it's just your job to manually try and fix that. Good enough. You can kind of see the idea there. Now the healing brush basically is a little bit different from the spot healing brush, where the healing brush is you can manually choose where you want the source to be picked from. So let's say I'm going to go back and put all those wrinkles back. There we go. So all the wrinkles are back. Instead of just dragging, you need to select a source that you want to pick from. So you have to click and hold the Option or Alt key, and then you can choose where you want the source to be sampled from. So I'm going to click here because it's a similar skin tone, and that should be my source. Now if I click, you can see that it's pulling from that exact selection, that area, and it's going to put it there. And it does its best job to, a decent job to try and mix it with the tones that are already there. So in some cases, that's a better tool. Now you might be wondering, how do you change the size of the radius? Well, you could do it a couple ways. I'm not really sure of the manual way. The way I always do it is using the square brackets on your keyboard, the left and right square brackets, and that changes the size here. And I can see up here, this is where you change the size manually. Up in the top left, you can change the size, you can change the hardness, meaning how if the edge is hard or soft, and the spacing. I'm not really sure what spacing is because I don't use it. So now you can see I can make it bigger. I can make it smaller for smaller areas, like say a wrinkle. And there we go. Okay, patch tool. Patch tool is basically like, let's say for example, Steven's hairline right here. If we wanted to get rid of these little fuzzy hairs and try our best to, remove it, we can make a selection like this, and now drag where you want it to be sampled from. So let's sample from down here. And it does its best to fill that in with that area. And now you can see if I edit undo, that's what it was before. And I'm going to try that again. And that's what it is now. So it does a decent job of filling that in. Now the content aware move tool is a fairly new tool that they added in a recent version of Photoshop, and it basically tries its best to find the closest area in the photograph to fill it in. So say for example here, these wrinkles on my backdrop, I can select it like that. And then I hit the delete key, and then you can fill that with content aware. So it will do its best to find the closest tones and textures to fill that in. And I'm just going to hit OK. And it's trying to fill it. It might do a good job. It might do a bad job. In my experience, it does a pretty good job. Okay, so you can see here it did a terrible job. It kind of created this little alien section in the middle here. Now, what we'll do here is, again, Photoshop's not perfect, so it takes a lot of manual work. So I'm going to deselect and edit undo. You can go edit undo set backward, or you can go Option Command Z and do that again, and it will bring it back. So let's try again. I'm just going to select a smaller area here. I'm going to go like this. And you can also move the selection, and it will do the same sort of thing as the patch tool. Now that again did a pretty bad job. I'm not really selling the content aware feature. Let me try one more time using delete. So I'm going to select a smaller area, hit delete, choose content aware, hit OK. One last time we're going to try this out, and it didn't do a very good job. Okay, so in some cases, it really doesn't work. So in that case, I would go and I would probably use the spot healing brush. I'd make a bit bigger of a selection here, and I just drag it right across. And again, it kind of uses the content aware feature. So Content aware is just a little bit their algorithm that they updated in the software to better fill these areas. So let's hope it does a good job. And again, not quite that good. So it might be just a bad area for me to try and fix. I can also try using the patch tool. Select and drag up here. And there we go. That's much better.